Hey guys, it's Ernesto and welcome back to yet another video. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. So today we're going to be doing a special broadcast like we did last week for Talking Business. So if you guys don't know, I started this show quite some time ago and I basically put it on hiatus, if you would, for about a year. And I was just totally dedicated mostly on just creating tutorials. So I brought it back so to because basically we all on quarantine, so I figured we might as well just sit down and chat about some good stuff. So before we so first of all, ahead and put your comments in the comment section if you have any questions as we go through this show. If this show is no longer live and you're watching it after the fact, please drop your questions down below and we'll come back to it and answer those questions. So that's the first thing I wanted to get out of the way. And the other thing is, what is this show about? Why did I start this show? So Talking Business is all about sitting down with real business owners to get to learn a little bit more about from their experience. What is it that they went through in starting their business, whatever their specialty is in photography or creative space, just to get an understanding of what they went through. Understand how they're running their business, and more importantly, learn what not to do in starting a business. So if you're a new business, if you're starting your business out there and you're new to it, obviously the one thing you want to do is to avoid certain things. So hopefully this show will give you some insight into those things that you should be avoiding. Now, each show covers a very specific topic, and on this show, we will be covering a very specific topic. Previous shows we cover like how to transition from your 9 to 5 to go full time if that's something that you're into. We also cover other shows like how to market your business, and also other shows like how to get started in the senior photography business if that's what you wanted to. With PhotoMe, I had John Chapman on previous show, Manny Ortez. So we had a couple of different people on previous shows. So check out those previous broadcasts if you guys haven't seen it before. Now on this show, what we're going to be covering is we're going to be sitting down with Kase Conder, and we're going to be talking about how he negotiated his first 20K photo shoot. So that's our topic for today. Now, what does this channel cover? This channel cover all cinematic lighting. You're gonna see tutorials on cinematic lighting, posing. We're gonna talk about posing on this channel. If you watch all the previous videos, it covers those type of topics, and future videos will also covers the same. In addition, we also cover composition. So I tend to focus mostly on the art of photography as opposed to more gear. So I try to focus more on that. So that's what this channel is mostly about. In addition to that, if you are new to the channel or you're new right now, you're watching us, please go ahead and give it a big thumbs up. Put a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell so you can get notified when we release a new video. All right, so Kase Conder. So Justin, I reached out to Justin to see if he could do the show with us. So I'll tell you a little bit about Justin. I'll read a little bit of his bio so you guys can get a sense of who he is. And then I'll share with Justin is a native of California. Kase Conder, curiosity and love of people inspire every aspect of his work. His interest in photography stem not from his desire to make photographs, rather from his tremendous curiosity and his want to meet different people every day. His camera has always been a means to that end. After working as a newspaper staff journalist, Justin traveled the world as the international photographer for the education and community service organization Rustic Pathways. Having spent 7 years photographing in 40 different countries around the globe, Justin now calls Raleigh, North Carolina his home. It is from there that he continues to serve clients like Lenovo, Otis, YMCA, the Weather Channel, and Volvo, with the same passion and attention to detail that has allowed his career to thrive. So, with that, like I said, I'm going to share a quick video of Justin's work. And after that, we're going to come right back and talk to Justin and hear all about his story of how he made that first 20K. Justin, what's going on? How are you, my friend?
Hey, Ernesto. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So, how is North Carolina treating you since you moved from North Carolina, from California?
You know, I love this state. There was a time when I was trying to decide what part of the country that I wanted to move to. I knew that I couldn't afford to continue to stay in California. It's a pretty expensive place. And so I looked at a few different places. North Carolina happened to be one of them. And I like it here a lot. There's a reason why 63 people a day move to North Carolina, specifically Raleigh, which is where I call home. Cost of living is amazing. The people are friendly, and the weather, with the exception of humidity in the summertime, is pretty exceptional as well.
I couldn't agree more. I moved here, I want to say 13, 14 years ago. I never imagined myself living in North Carolina. I moved down here because my wife basically moved here first, and I followed her along. Actually, while she was here, we still had a home in the Bronx, and I had to travel back and forth because we had that home there until we sold it. And until when it was sold, I still had to travel back and forth between here and North Carolina every weekend. So I really didn't get to enjoy it. And to settle, given that I grew up in the Bronx and I was living in the Bronx before moving here, it was difficult for me to, get used to this slow atmosphere. So I had to adjust myself. It took me about 6 years to get used to this whole
Wow.
to this whole thing. So now I'm fully adjusted,
Yeah.
but don't ask me to move back to New York. I can't do it. So
Yeah, that would be a challenge. I can appreciate not just for the cost of living, but for the speed of life would be a little bit different, no doubt about it.
yes, yes. So yes, I totally agree with you. So I know you've been doing photography for about 22 years. That's a very long time, longer than I have been doing it. That's for sure. Um, so
Yeah.
how did you get into photography? Why photography?
You know, I got an early start. When I was in middle school in eighth grade, a magnet high school came to my middle school, and they were doing a presentation trying to recruit students to go to their magnet high school, and they had a television radio program at that school. And at that moment, after the presentation was made and all the assembly sort of broke up, I thought about what I wanted to do. I was in eighth grade, which probably would have made me about 13 years old, 12 or 13 years old, and I knew a few things. I wanted to work outside. I wanted to meet different people every day, and I did want to have to wear a suit and tie to work. And so that led me to television and radio production. I grew up watching Peter Jennings as a kid, who was a national television broadcaster on ABC News. And I eventually went to that magnet high school. I took the television radio course that first year, and in addition to three criteria I mentioned, I determined after spending some time with some television news folks that I also wanted to have autonomy. So I wanted to work outside, meet different people every day, not have to wear a suit and tie to work, and have autonomy. And that led me continued the path onto journalism. I thought about being a reporter for a brief period of time, but I wanted to be where the things were happening. And I said, well, if you're a photojournalist, you have to be where the thing is happening. And so as a result, that was the career path that I chose. And here we are. That was a long time ago. 1994 is when I, well, made that first decision, I guess. So that's where we're at now.
Yeah, I was kind of curious how you got into the whole world of photojournalism. So that kind of explains why you made that leap. I guess why is it that you didn't? I guess is because of the whole fact that you want that autonomy. But why didn't you just become a journalist instead of becoming a photojournalist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I write relatively well, but I don't write as well under pressure. And so that was one of the things that I thought might hamstring me. And also one of the, early things that I did in my career was I spent a lot of time with photographers from my local newspaper. And I saw that it wasn't uncommon for reporters to make phone calls as opposed to going to the scene where something was happening. And I didn't want to get relegated to the sidelines. Even if you chose to be a sports reporter for that matter, you're up in a press box 600 yards away from the actual sort of play on the field. And so I wanted to be as close and personal. And for me, the connection to the people was such a big factor. And that's not to say that there aren't reporters that don't make those connections. They certainly do. But there's an intimacy that you gain and that has to be afforded to you as a photojournalist, where I can come up with, my gear and my lenses and get in your space sometimes. And that was something that I valued. I really enjoyed the idea of walking in somebody else's shoes for a period of time.
It's very interesting. So, and I know you did an awful lot of traveling. Did you do all those traveling as a journalist, or did you do it under a different umbrella?
Yeah, so my photojournalism work definitely took me all over the United States. I did internships every single year of with the exception of 1 year in college, I did newspaper internships. And those internships were varied. One was in North Dakota, one was in Boston at the Boston Globe, one was in Northern California. And each one of those, I decided to drive to those destinations. Another was in St. Louis. In driving to those destinations took me to quite a few states. I think I was 30, I probably was, 2029 by the time that I visited every state in the continental United States. And I was 36 by the time that I visited every state, including Alaska. So my initial domestic travel absolutely came from my photography. In addition to that, I was also a sports photographer for what's now the sports photo department for USA Today Sports in Gannett. And so that I spent a lot of time photographing NASCAR races, PGA, spent a lot of time in the San Francisco Bay Area photographing San Francisco 49ers, Raiders, Giants, and A's. So yeah, there was, I was a college athletic sports photographer as well for my university at Fresno State. And so that occasionally took me on the road when our teams did really well. But it wasn't until later, after my newspaper photojournalism career, that the travel sort of grew exponentially. And that was when I joined an international community service and adventure travel company called Rustic Pathways. And those guys took me to 42 countries around the world. 42 countries around the world that I've been to at this point. 42 or 43. I've got a list to keep track of because sometimes it's hard to remember. And for some people, did you just land in the airport, or did you actually go out and do something? So yeah, I've got a list with asterisks next to places where I actually landed in the airport. And I do not count those. And then I've got the list of actual places that I've actually spent time in. So yeah,
I think I did the research for you. I think it's 43 different countries.
43. Thank you. I appreciate that. Somebody did their homework. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. 43. 43. Yeah, that sounds right, Ernest. I'm going to go with what you're saying.
So I guess looking back at all of that traveling experience all that traveling that you did, looking back, what experience would you take away from all of that you did, with the current state of where we are in this country today? Like what is the experience from looking back, all the 43 different countries that you went to?
Yeah. as I mentioned, as a photojournalist, you really have a unique opportunity to step into people's lives and to step into people's worlds. Um, there are times where I get to spend an entire day with people who I've never met in my entire life, and suddenly they're letting me photograph the most intimate aspects of their world. Um, Travel has an incredible, unique ability to show you at the end of the day, Ernesto, how similar humans are. We might look different on the outside, we might speak differently, the color of our skin might be different, but at the end of the day, the way that we love, the way that we care, the way that we feel pain, the way that we experience joy, it doesn't matter whether I'm sitting with my next door neighbor, enjoying a story that he's told me about his adventures throughout, being a folklorist musician, or sitting on a longboat in a river in Thailand and speaking with somebody about their experience. There's a shared humanity that I think is paramount. And I mentioned previously that part of the motivation for becoming a photojournalist was getting to spend time with people. And I think more than anything, I've been exceptionally fortunate to do so because of the career path that I've chosen. But in addition to that, the opportunity to travel the globe and turn other people's shoes and get a chance to spend time in their lives. It's one thing to be a tourist, and it's a different thing to be a traveler. The differentiating factor between those is a tourist is there to see, to sort of absorb, and sort of, maybe check off a list, whereas the tourist is there to experience. You have experiential encounters with people. You break bread with people, you spend time with people. And it's in that experience that you find out that the differences between us are so small. They're so small compared to, I think, what most people assume that they are.
I completely agree. Completely agree. I think people could learn to, expand their minds a little bit more, like what you just explained. Uh, I think it would do the world a lot of good. So,
I can't remember times where I was having an experience and I wished that I could push a button somehow and bring my closest friends and family, and sometimes this entire country, just bring them there to see what this was like. Because we have these preconceived ideas that are based on things that are varied. But having those experiences with individuals, just like we're having a conversation right now, granted this is a little bit unique because I'm speaking to you through a camera, but breaking bread with people and sharing those experiences with people and seeing what joy looks like on the face of a Tanzanian man relative to a Fijian, to an indigenous person in the outback of Australia is a remarkable experience.
yeah, yeah. So, with all that experience that you had, and I'm sure some of it were good, some of it were bad, but what made you get out of the photojournalism world? What pushed you out of the world? And I put "get out" in quotes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I should preface this answer by saying that I absolutely love photojournalism. If photojournalists were compensated at a rate that allowed them to, in newspapers for that matter, at a rate that allowed them to sort of live a life that was affordable, that they could continue to keep a roof over their head, and many of them do, but it's just very difficult. I would still be a photojournalist. There was not a day that it went by that wasn't interesting. I have yet, Ernesto, to come up with a career that would have allowed me in the same capacity to experience the things that I mentioned, those four criteria. There's not another career that I can think of, and I've thought about that often. What else would allow me to work outside, meet different people every day, not have to wear a suit and tie to work, and have some autonomy? So at the end of the day, to just be direct and answer your question, it was the compensation. Photojournalists don't make a tremendous amount of money, and in part that's because there are so many people that are interested in doing it. There's a tremendous desire to be a photojournalist. Everybody, as a young person, as a photographer, wants to grow up and become a National Geographic photographer. And many strive for that. And that's an extremely unique, that's like making it to the New York Yankees starting lineup, if you will. But making it to newspapers is exceptionally competitive as well. And as a result of that, and as a result of the fact that people don't read newspapers anymore, they don't consume news in the same way. It's very challenging for those publications to keep their doors open and to employ people at a wage that is equivalent to sort of the effort that they put in. So ultimately, it was the fact that people, were reading newspapers, and I didn't see that improving anytime soon. So in 2009, I opted to choose a different path, and it still continues to be that way, unfortunately. And there's not a better time at this moment right now when we're having this conversation that illustrates how important local news is to people in their lives. So it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate.
So would you recommend someone, if they were to come to you and say, hey, I want to be a photojournalist, I want to go to school to study for photojournalism, would you recommend that as a career path?
I'll answer that two answers for you. I wouldn't recommend that they go to school to do it. In fact, I initially chose to pursue a career in a degree in photojournalism, in journalism with an emphasis in photojournalism. And it was in my second semester in college that I determined that was not something, it wasn't me, in fact, it was my friends and colleagues that worked at newspapers who said that I would be much better served to get a degree in something else that would serve me well rather than photojournalism. The fact is that if you have the skill set, a more well-rounded person is going to do better as a journalist, is going to be able to relate to people better than I think somebody who has a specific degree in that. My degree was actually in education. My thought was, and I knew early on how competitive photojournalism was, and I opted to get a degree in liberal studies with an emphasis in education, so that if I didn't make it as a photojournalist, I could opt to be a teacher. So I would say this: if you're interested in becoming a photojournalist, and it's a tremendous, it's a lifestyle. It's a tremendous experience. Vincent LaFerre, who's a photographer, he's a director now in Los Angeles, used to be a photojournalist for the New York Times, has shot for Apple, has shot for the biggest brands and companies you've ever heard of. And he just posted on Facebook the other day and was talking about how much he missed that world. Because it's such a unique place. And so I would absolutely encourage anybody that has an interest in that, particularly minorities, women and minorities, because those voices need to be heard more. And there's a place for those individuals, even more so, I think, than Caucasian white guys like me. So yeah, I would certainly encourage people to do that, but just know that it's extremely difficult. It takes a tremendous amount of effort. But diligence pays off. I think that was the biggest thing for me, was just a continued persistence and diligence for me is what paid off at the end of the day. And get a degree in something that will allow you to transition into something else if it doesn't work out, or something else that you might be passionate about, or something else that might serve you as a journalist.
Yeah, I'm just, as you were talking, I'm sharing some of the images of your work from your photojournalism days. And one of the things I noticed is that, what you get access to certain, celebrities and stuff like that you wouldn't normally get access to as a photojournalist, because I guess you get, put on assignments. I guess give me I guess one experience that you had, working with, someone, I guess that's a little bit famous, because I think I saw on your slideshow, I can't remember the guy's name. I'm gonna try to butcher it, but I guess give me some of the experience.
Maybe Kevin Costner might be in there.
There you go.
Yeah, Kevin Costner. There's some photographs of some athletes. Yeah. So for those who are a little bit, this is YouTube, so skewed to the younger side. Kevin Costner is an Oscar award-winning actor who has was a heartthrob at one point in time, and I had the opportunity to photograph him. I was an intern actually at the Boston Globe at the time. This was 2003, and the Boston Globe had something like 20 plus photojournalists. And I came into the office that day. Really cool. And I was kind of ribbing her and giving her a bad time. And I was like, yeah, that's great. Johnny gets to go photograph somewhere interesting again. And she's like, well, was like, what do you got for me today? And she's like, well, let's see here. And she goes down her list and she says, looks like you're photographing Kevin Costner. You're going to have about 5 minutes with him. And this is running on the front page section of the entertainment section of the newspaper this coming weekend. So don't screw it up. And I was just like, oh, deer in the headlights, man. Like, I mean, you know, Kevin Costner, he was doing a press junket where he was going around promoting his most recent film. And so, yeah, that was the experience. And so I went to Copley Square there in Boston. And as they do in these situations, you're given a hotel room. And your job is to, at the end of the day, turn, as we say in the business, is sometimes you have to turn chicken shit into chicken salad. And I'll be honest with you, Kevin Costner is a beautiful human being. You know, it's exceptionally easier to photograph. You know, somebody who knows how to move in front of the camera, who's accustomed to being in front of the camera, who's comfortable being in front of the camera. But I'll never forget, I arrived at the hotel, and I called my good friend Tommaso Valle, who was my mentor back in California. And I said, Tomas, I just got the assignment to photograph Kevin Costner. You know, bear in mind, this is 2003. I'm 23 years old. I've been a photojournalist for just a few years. And, you know, Kevin Costner is a big name. He's still a big name today. And, you know, it's a long time after that. And so anyhow, I'm freaking out and I'm like, you got to help me out. What can I do? And he's like, first of all, calm down, take some deep breaths. And he's like, what's the story? What's the assignment? And says, well, he's promoting this new film of his, a cowboy film, if I'm not mistaken. And anyhow, I said, I have, 5 minutes with him. He's like, well, treat this as you would anybody else. Find some interesting light, find something that looks appealing, and make some photographs. You're going to have to take some deep breaths, though, and treat him as anybody else, because the last thing you want to do is be anxious. Go down your checklist, cross your T's and dot your I's. And so I was fortunate in that he was supposed to come in that morning around 11 o'clock or somewhere around that time, sometime in the early morning, or mid-morning. And so I'm sitting in the hotel room. I figured out, in my head, I've got a shot list of what I want to create. And I'm pretty anxious. And luckily, the publisher called me, or the PR sort of assistant called and said, hey, we're running a little bit late, which gave me a little more time to sort of calm down. And so when he walked in the room, the press agent looked at me. She says, you have 3 minutes. And I remember this vividly because, I had anticipated 5 minutes. And so you have 3 minutes with him. And I said, whoa. And I had this it was an opportunity to sort of create some boundaries, so to speak, and be like, I know that I might be young. I know that I might not be, known. But I said, hey, I'm going to need 5 minutes with him at least. You got to at least give me 5 minutes. And so she said, okay, that's 5 minutes, but that's it. And so, Mr. Costner, it's a pleasure to meet you. In front of me, I shake his hand. I had set up a chair in front of a big, large window and a big light, much like the one that I have here that just went out a moment ago. I think because I haven't touched it or done anything with it for a second. And I sat him down, and as you probably brought up on the screen there, I made a couple of photographs of him. And it was relatively easy. I think my heart was pounding out of my chest. It was racing out of my chest because it was nerve wracking. There's lots of people around that are sort of watching what you're doing. And, but I'll be honest with you, again, photographing somebody who is comfortable in being in front of the camera and is confident being in front of the camera is day and night difference between photographing somebody who is a little bit anxious, or nervous. And I was the most nervous person in the room that day. So he was friendly. He was kind. He wasn't any more kind than, might be required. Again, he was doing a press junket, so he was traveling all over the United States to promote this film. I got 5 minutes with him. He probably went into the next room and did another 5-minute interview with somebody else. And that's kind of how these things go. So yeah, that's not the, those experiences. I had lots of opportunities over the years to engage and sort of rub elbows with more famous folks. But the important point that I want to come back to is the fact that at the end of the day, they're folks just like us. They put on their pants just like we do, one pant leg at a time. And, the more time I think you spend with them, the more you sort of realize that they're just people. And that always made things a little bit easier when those opportunities presented themselves.
Well, I'll certainly take that advice whenever I shoot a famous person.
Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to see if I can get this light to do what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
I'm going to power this up here, and there we go. let me see. I don't have an easy way. I may have to do that a few times just because I don't have it. It's a Godox light that I'm just using, just a simple
Okay,
octabox.
got it.
But I don't have my. Well, I do actually. Let's just. I've got to pull out one of my remote triggers here and see if I can keep this thing going, so it doesn't time out on us again. We'll see if we can do that. But yeah, that was my experience with Kevin Costner. It was a good experience. It was a good experience, and that photo is still a great picture. Still a picture I'm proud of, but clearly it's still on my website, right?
Yeah. So, when you got out of the photojournalism world, how did you
Mm-hmm.
get it? How did you know that I guess commercial photography was the appropriate direction that you needed to get into after you got out of photojournalism?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mentioned those internships that I did in college, and on my return travels uh, from my last internship, which was in Grand Forks, North Dakota. I went from the Boston Globe, which at the time was probably one of the top 10 largest newspapers in the country. I had been a finalist for an internship, in fact, that next summer at National Geographic. I was one of 10. I was shortlisted as one of 10 individuals that had been considered. I didn't get it. Um, it's still a feather in my cap, but I wanted to go and experience rural, small town America. And I applied for a lot of newspapers in the Deep South. I didn't get any opportunities there. I think they probably looked at my resume and said, "You're coming from the Boston Globe. Why would you want to do this?" But again, for me, it's never been about taking or making the photographs. It's been about the camera's always been a vehicle for the things that I desire to do, and that is to engage and to meet people. If there was a way to do that without a camera, I love taking pictures. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. But for me, that was the tool. And when I started my career, I wasn't very good. I had friends that were exceptional at what they did, and I had to hone those skills continuously, and refine and refine and refine and refine to get to the point where I'm at now. But to come back to your question, I was traveling from North Dakota, where I'd done this internship, my last internship at the Grand Forks Herald in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Probably one of my favorite experiences. And I was traveling back through Kansas City, Missouri. And at the time, my brother lived there. And so I stopped by to meet with him. And a friend of his boss was a commercial photographer by the name of Nick Medros. And I never heard of Nick, but Nick, he had an incredible studio. I stopped by his office to meet with him. And my stepbrother had said, hey, maybe you should, reach out to this guy and have a conversation with him. And so I stopped by his offices and we had a long conversation. He offered me an internship, but it wasn't paid. And that was, I grew up pretty poor, and there was no way that I could accept an opportunity to work for 4 to 6 months without any compensation. That wasn't a privilege that I had. And so anyhow, what that resulted in, though, was Nick was doing a photo shoot for Capital One. This was back in around 2004. And Capital One, today they still have the commercials. Capital One, they're a huge bank. But at the time they were doing a series of commercials called What's in Your Wallet. And they were with Vikings, these Visigoths or Vikings. And so Nick was photographing the annual report for Capital One. And he asked me if I wanted to come and experience what it was like to be on set with him. They were photographing on the back lot of Warner Brothers Studios. They were photographing on the hillside of Malibu, California. They were photographing in all these really unique places. And so they were photographing in the USC's Coliseum, where USC football plays, all these really unique places. And so I had an opportunity to go down there and check it out. But again, I didn't have a lot of money. And so I ended up staying with a friend who lived an hour and a half north in Santa Barbara. And each day I would drive down to Los Angeles, which is a distance if you've ever traveled that far or are familiar with that area. And I got to see what it was like to be on set with Nick. And just to give you some scope, the annual report for Capital One at the time, and I doubt it's the case today, but at that time, the annual report's budget for photography was something like $250,000. It was $250,000 for like 2 weeks worth of photography that was taking place. It's just a mind-blowing number. And so, but it costs money. I mean, I rocked up there and, here's production trucks and full, they were recreating what it looked like to film one of the Visigoth or Viking commercials. And so he was shooting, they recreated the scene where they were shooting the commercial, and he was shooting behind the scenes of that to illustrate that. And you had Vikings on set, and it was remarkable. It was a really remarkable experience. And so that was sort of my introduction to the world of commercial photography. And I'll tell you, it was long after that I was able to wrap my mind around what commercial photography was. I still didn't quite get it. I mean, there were 20 plus people on that set that particular day, but that was my introduction. It wasn't until later in life, that was 2004, around 2006, 2007, I learned of an opportunity through an organization called American Society of Media Photographers, ASMP. And they were hosting a business conference called Strictly Business 2. It was a business conference that was taking place in Philadelphia. It was a 3-day conference, and it had nothing to do with shutter speeds, f-stops, ISOs, had nothing to do with that at all. It was strictly focused on the business of photography. And it was there that I went and heard individuals like my now friend John Harris, who literally wrote a book on best business practices for photographers, talk about contracts in the amount of, $20, $30, $50, $80,000. And you're sitting there looking at some of these contracts, and you're going like, at the time, I had just started my first full-time newspaper job, and I think I was getting compensated. I think my entry level annual salary was $29,000. And I'm having conversations and hearing people speak about photo shoots where, their entire budget for the project is twice what my entire salary was for the year. So that was really where I put, okay, here's Nick Vidros' experience. This is the top of the food chain. And here's what some of these other folks are doing, because the gap between a $250,000 project and, a $20,000 project was vast. But once I had a moment to understand sort of what those other folks were doing, it sort of opened my mind to that experience.
So once you saw the potential, that I guess the financial gap there between what you were making and what you could potentially make, how did you eventually break into the whole world of commercial photography? So one of the first thing that comes to my mind when I think commercial photography is I need an agent. How did you get into the world of commercial photography?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a great question. In fact, two things I want to note. For me, it's never been about the money. There are many people on this planet that are driven by the financial sort of ladder. That's never been something I've been interested in. I'm certainly interested in keeping a roof over my head and being able to make a living that affords a lifestyle that I enjoy. But if I was driven by money, I think I probably would have become I would have gone into sales. I would have gone into pharmaceuticals or real estate or something along those lines. I'd have been a lawyer. But for me, it's always been about, the connection with people and enjoying that. So it wasn't a financial component. I left newspapers because I saw that it wasn't sustainable. But even at $29,000, if I'd been making $50,000 as a photojournalist, today I would still do it. And that's a lot of money for some people, but that's, when you break down the costs and that sort of thing. So I just want to address that first of all. And then the other thing I wanted to mention too is I think it's important to differentiate between the worlds of editorial and commercial. And it's very simple, and it was hard for me to sort of wrap my head around initially, but at the end of the day, an editorial photographer there is there on account of a publication to tell a story. A commercial photographer is there on account of the business, and oftentimes businesses have a much larger budget to tell their story than a small publication does, or even a big publication does, for that matter. So when I take off my hat as a photojournalist and I put on my hat as a commercial photographer, really the difference is not vast, other than that the imagery that I'm creating, its final destination is going to be used to promote a product, a service, a person, a personality, a brand. As an editorial photographer, as a photojournalist, my goal is to tell a story, and that goal is to tell that story with the most truth and authenticity that I possibly can. Whereas if I'm photographing for a brand, it's a different story. And my job at that point is to make this brand, this personality, this service look as good as it possibly can. And for me personally, while also still trying to bring some authenticity to the picture. So I think it's important to differentiate between those two things. Commercial photographer, sometimes they overlap, but many times they're a little bit different. But to come back to your question in regard to how that transition happened, essentially what happened was in 2006, I was photographing a photographer who on weekends I would assist a photographer who was the corporate photographer, Peninsula Hotels and the Ritz-Carlton. If you're not familiar with Peninsula Hotels, don't worry, I wasn't either. That's because Peninsula Hotels, this was in 2008, the cost to stay at a Peninsula Hotel on a weeknight, say a Wednesday, minimum cost was $700 a night. And this guy's job was to photograph their hotel rooms. And so we would go and photograph in places like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. And I was staying in $700 a night hotels. I was getting paid as an assistant to this photographer over a weekend more than I would make in about 2 weeks at my newspaper job. And so for me, again, there were components of financial components of it, but eventually I went to my newspaper and said, hey, as I mentioned previously in our conversation, as a newspaper photojournalist, it's a lifestyle. It's not a job. Don't clock in at 9 and leave at 5. It's a continuous sort of process. This weekend, for example, I put on my hat as a photojournalist and I went and photographed, the protests that are taking place right now on account of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And that is a lifestyle. I was out till 2 a.m. in the morning photographing that. It's very different than what you do as a commercial photographer. I literally threw my gear on my shoulders. I went down and I was in photojournalism mode. The productions that we're going to talk about and sort of, the photo shoot that we did, I had like a 2-week lead time. Well, I take it back. In that particular job, I didn't. But there's other projects that I've worked on where I've had a month lead time. And so there's a vast difference between how those two worlds sort of operate. But the point is that I went to my newspaper and I said I wanted a few things. I wanted to work consistent days of the week because my shift was all over the place. I wanted a small increase in pay, and I wanted consistent hours. Some days I would work from 7 to 3, and other days, 2 days later, I worked from 3 to 12, and it was like 3 in the afternoon to 12 at night or 9 at night, and that wasn't sustainable. And so when they basically laughed at me and said, we're not going to give this to you, I laughed back at them and I said, hey, I'm making more money as an assistant helping this guy as his number 2 guy, staying in $700 a night hotels. I'm going to do that. And so that combined with sort of the writing on the wall with newspapers is when I left newspapers and I became a freelance photojournalist. And I worked in DC, photographing on Capitol Hill for all sorts of different newspapers all around the United States and that sort of thing. So I was still had my photojournalism hat on, but I was becoming more and more accustomed or associated with the commercial world and sort of what that entailed. And it wasn't until just a few years ago, 2017, I left sort of DC. I went to California. I shot high-end weddings there for a period of time, which is kind of a form of commercial photography. Well, kind of to some degree, some components of it. And then I left that and I joined this international travel company, which I did for 7 years. Took me to 43 countries, as you so kindly reminded me. And then after that, I was laid off in March of 2016. I just moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. I moved here for a girl, and it's amazing what tugging on those heartstrings will do. I moved all the way from California to North Carolina for somebody, and unfortunately, in March of 2017, I lost my job at that company. They laid off about 25 of their staff, including myself, and then the relationship ended in June. And so my world was pretty dark. It was a pretty dark period for me, and so much like I've done in many times in my life, I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I, came back to me like, hey, commercial photography is a viable way to do this. I still wanted to make pictures. I still wanted to connect with people. And so that was, that's what I did. And in fact, the job we're about to talk about is the first sort of real commercial job that I did. I had other small jobs for PR firms and this sort of thing here and there. But as far as a commercial job to photograph for a brand, to represent a brand, and so that those images could be used to promote that brand, it's another differentiating factor in the hands of that company. That wasn't something that I'd done just yet.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for that explanation of the distinction between editorial and commercial. I think that's very important to understand, and I believe you lead us up nicely to talking about this job. Now, I did title this video the 20K, how he made his first 20K, but it's really not about the 20K. It's really about you know how to properly price, so you could get your the job that you're looking for, right? It's not about just getting 20K. So
Absolutely.
that being
Yeah.
said, what I'm gonna do here, I'm controlling it so you guys see me looking at my screen all the time because I'm switching back and forth. But I have slides here, so Justin is gonna go through and talk about how he was able to land his first his commercial job. So Justin, I'm putting up here your first slide. And actually, that is not your first slide. But what I'm displaying is your first slide, basically, of you in your wonderful white hat with your camera. Okay, I'm gonna switch to the second slide. So this second slide is just talking about the newspaper circulations and what was happening there.
For me. I loved what I did, but it didn't seem like it was going to be sustainable. And it's been on a downward slope for a long, long time. I mean, I have friends and colleagues that consistently are laid off from the jobs that they love and jobs that are important. And so that was a very challenging time, but I sort of saw what was coming and got out of there.
Brilliant. So some folks were saying that they weren't able to hear your audio, so I think I fixed it, so hopefully they'll be able to see it. So the only audio that went out is when you were talking about your wonderful white hat. So so I'm gonna flip forward to your website that you were sharing because I believe this was one of the things, the first things that you did when you started out in your commercial photography. So the slide that I'm showing right now is just your website.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, one of the first things that was important to me was I needed a place that that I could send professional clients, professional businesses to that represented me well. You've seen plenty of folks, I think, oftentimes it's not uncommon. At one point in time, my job was to hire photographers with the company that I worked for to send, I had the privilege of sending 21 photographers around the world every single summer for many years. And sometimes I would get applicants that would send me links to their Facebook pages. And that's not a good representation of your professionalism. I wanted to have a way to represent myself and try and compete with folks out there that were charging what I knew were high dollar amounts for photo shoots. And a big part of that, Ernesto, is perception of value. In order to secure the type of clients that have the budgets to do the kind of shoots that I was interested in doing and to the level that I wanted to do them, I had to put forth a presentation. And this notion of perception of value came from my work as a wedding photographer. I worked with exceptional wedding photographers, but the way that they presented themselves, from the thank you letters that they wrote, the type of paper that they were on, that's important. There's a perception of quality that comes with that, and so for me, the first thing was I knew that I had to create a professional website, and so I spent quite a bit of time going through determining what that website was going to look like. What you see here was the results of that. I'm literally in the process as we speak, and I have been for the last 3 months, of developing a new website, completely new branding. If you guys are looking at this now, well, if you're looking at this now, this is what you're going to see on my website. If you're looking at this within the next 2 weeks or thereafter, it's going to look very different. And I'll just speak to that. I hired a professional graphic designer this last go round, and I paid him a handsome sum of money. We'll leave it at that. Let me just be honest with you. Let me just tell you what the numbers were, because I think that's important, because people want to know. I paid this individual several thousands of dollars in order to create a logo for me and branding for me. All the collateral that I would need to create that perception of value, so that when I send letters and contracts to my clients, they reflect the quality and the level of work that I bring to the table. I hired a professional consultant as well to help me narrow down the images that were going to be represented on my site, somebody who was familiar with this. When you're editing your own work, it's difficult to separate yourself from the images. You were there, you were in that scene, you know what it's like to be in that moment. So it's helpful, if you can afford to do so, to hire somebody else, and there's plenty of consultants out there that will help you do this, to narrow those images down to what they think will help you get the type of work that you're looking for. So that was one component. I brought that individual. I'll just tell you his name. The website is, his name is Peter Denon, and he's with a company called Pedro and Jackie. He lives up in Maine, and his job was to help me narrow down the images that you see on my website from thousands and thousands of pictures to those that you see on my website now. So that was one of the first components, was trying to figure out how to create a website. I wanted it to look good. I went and looked at what the competition was doing. I wanted it to represent my image as well. The logo that you see there on that particular website was something that I also had professionally designed at the time. It was for my wedding brand, but when I transitioned from my job as a international photographer to commercial world, I couldn't afford to hire a designer to redesign a logo. So I just used the one that I used for high-end weddings at the time. And so all of these things, it's the attention to detail, I think, at the end of the day, that makes a tremendous difference in the perception of value. And I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Perception of value is not just, it's what you put out there, but you also have to bring the goods. In order to get the clients you want, you have to have a perception of value. But then at the end of the day, that's just what gets the person their foot in the door. At the end of the day, they got to come back around. You got to deliver. If you don't deliver at the end of the day, you're not going to maintain your reputation, and that's going to be bad too. So this is just to get your horse to the gate, so to speak.
It's very important. So, sorry, hang on. I was trying to flip through the slide and I flipped through something else. That's the joy of multitasking and doing a live broadcast at the same time. So the next slide that I'm showing here is an email that's basically saying, what is your availability tomorrow, Thursday, to set up your time to connect? Thanks.
Yeah. So let me set the scene for you. I was laid off in March of 2016. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I launched this website, and I get an email in January of 2017, basically from a former colleague of mine. She had just taken a position at another company as a human resources director in the Bay Area. It's $150 million art supply company. So you walk into an art supply store. This is the company that that imports a lot of the goods. A lot of the goods that you see on the store shelves. And so she wanted to know what my availability was to do a photo shoot for them. And so the next day I had a conference call with her, an executive of the company, about how they wanted to tell their story and how they wanted to do it with my photographs.
Awesome. Sorry. Again, multitasking. All right. So basically, the next slide that I'm showing here, Justin, is what basically had a title, well, not a title, but a big call out here saying, what are you asking for is going to cost 15K to 25K.
Right. So I had this conference call with this executive. It was the VP of the company and this HR director that I'd worked at with a previous company. And in fact, the one that I'd just been laid off with, just a few months prior. And so they told me what they wanted. We went through the sort of the shots. They had a distribution center in Reno, Nevada. They had a distribution center in Atlanta, Georgia. And they had stores that they wanted to photograph in the Bay Area. And so we're talking about 3 days of shooting, 3 different locations around the United States. You know, and one of the first things that I did, Ernesto, and this is one of the most important components of any job you're trying to figure out, is I asked them what their budget was. I said, you know, what do you expect to spend on this project? And this is not something that they had ever done. So it's imperable that you ask that question, but it's not uncommon for companies, unless this is sort of the world that they're accustomed to working in, and this company was not one of those, that know the answer to that question. And so, you know, I then took the opportunity. I said, you know, I took those figures. I looked at the stats. I did a cost analysis. I did a breakdown. What would it cost me? How many nights in a hotel would that's going to cost? What were the flights going to cost? What was it going to cost for every component to make this shoot come together? And, you know, from everything from the Uber ride to the airport, to the extra luggage that I was going to have to take on the plane, to hiring an assistant in San Francisco, to hiring an assistant in Atlanta. You know, what was it going to, all of these things have costs. And I think that's one of the most important components to leave with the viewers tonight, and those watching this thereafter, is that if you don't factor in what all of those costs are at the end of the day, you're going to sell yourself short, and you're not going to be able to sustain yourself. At the end of the day, you need to charge enough money to be able to sustain yourself. You have to know the cost of doing business. If you're sitting there and you're like, that sounds great, Justin, how in the world do I know what my cost of doing business is? I've got a tip for you. Go to NPPA.com, the National Press Photographers Association, or just Google NPPA cost of doing business calculator. And there is a website that will break down, and it will help you break down what your cost of doing business is. Because I think what a lot of people don't realize is that, you know, all this equipment that we have, all this great stuff, these new cameras, I'm shooting with Sony A7 IIIs these days. You know, after 20 years with Canon gear, that costs me a tremendous amount of money to make that transition. If you don't know what those costs are at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to sustain yourself doing what it is that you're interested in doing. So anyhow, you sort of reverse it. I looked at this and I said, travel, assistance, food, lodging, extra fees, airfare, you know, all of these different things. What are the costs going to be? I broke those things down. That came out to a figure. And then I added on top of that how much that I thought it was worth for the value that the pictures were going to have. This is a national company that has a national footprint, and they're going to use those images for their advertising. They're going to use them. You know, one of the questions that I often ask Ernesto when I'm talking to a client about what the picture is going to be used for is, are these pictures going to be used on the back of buses in Shanghai, or is this just pictures are going to be used in your regional sort of neck of the woods, in your state, in your city? Because that makes a difference. If the pictures are just going to be used regionally, then the value that they have is relative to the regional use. If the pictures are going to be used internationally on an international campaign, then suddenly that value increases exponentially, right? And you should be compensated in reflection of that. So I then found out what the usage was going to be. And I determined that, okay, I factor all these things in, and I came out with the numbers. I spit a little number out, some rough spitballing here, and I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be a $15,000 to $25,000 job. And that was really hard for me to sort of grasp. Like, I knew that here, but I didn't know how to express that to a client. How do you tell somebody? How does somebody who once worked a job where their annual salary was $29,000, right, tell somebody that for this photo shoot that we're doing, which is going to take, I don't know, I think a grand total, there were several days of preparation involved, 3 shoot days, 2 travel days. Even with those things, how do you tell somebody when you come from a world where you made $29,000 shooting pictures, and you're going to do the same kind of pictures, you're going to make the same kind of photographs, that's going to cost somebody for 10 pictures, right? 10, count them, 10 pictures, $25,000. That was a hard thing for me to do. So what did I do? I went and I talked to some of my friends. I posted some things on a couple of different forums. One of the benefits of having been in this business for as long as I have is you have the value of, and if you're kind and you sort of, pay it forward on times, people will pay it forward back to you. So I reached out to some friends of mine. I said, hey, here's people that are in this world. They've transitioned from the editorial newspaper world to the commercial world. I literally wanted to know, how do I ask a question? How do I say this is going to cost $25,000? It's kind of funny for me now in this moment, because this is several years ago now. I put a contract together late last year for $100,000 shoot. I could never have fathomed doing something like that. But I put the contract together at the time, and I said, how does this work? I literally practiced saying out loud. I called my friend Colin, who lives in Philadelphia. He's a great photographer, exceptionally very familiar with this sort of stuff. And I said, can we practice my telling you how much this is going to cost? Because I was going to have a phone call the next day with the executives. I said, sure. And we pretended, and this is something that I learned at the ASMP conference 10 years prior, right? Ring, 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 ring. We pretended. Colin and I, he's on the phone. Hey, Justin, this is George from XYZ company. We're curious if you had an opportunity to sort of consider what we're looking for, the photographs that we're looking for, the story we want you to tell. And I practiced with him. And I said, yeah, I'm thinking that's probably going to cost about $23,000 to $25,000. And Colin said, oh, wow. Okay, well, that sounds good. No joke, Ernesto. 30 seconds after that call, after I practiced those words, I get a phone call from the executive, the VP of the company, and my former colleague. And we had that exact conversation. And I had just practiced it. And so the butterflies were going nuts in my stomach, but you literally say it's going to cost, and it sounds crazy. I'm having a difficult time saying it right now because maybe some of your viewers, I don't know, maybe they can appreciate or respect the fact that, like, to tell somebody it's going to cost $25,000 to produce a photo shoot for 10 pictures, that's unfathomable to me. But here's the difference, because it's not just inflated cost. There was cost involved in the production. There was cost involved in I had done the math to determine that every single one of these line items and these variables, and we'll go through a contract here shortly, that this is what it looks like, right? So, it was difficult for me to wrap my head around, but that's how things sort of came out. And so we had that conversation, and I got advice from several of my colleagues, and they said, this is what a job like that costs. And here's the thing, I knew that in my head. It was just a matter of saying it out loud and practicing it. Sometimes you just got to practice. And if you don't have a friend to call, then practice in the mirror. Give yourself that confidence.
Yeah, it's from your story there. What I got out of that is that, asking that first question of, what is your budget? That's something that I actually do with with clients that call me up for portrait photography, and wedding photography. That was the first of the things I asked them. What is your budget? Because I hate to have that conversation with them about, I'm going to charge you X dollars, and they say, oh, I can only afford this. I just don't want to have that conversation. But that's one of the things that I basically ask them, and practicing. That's a good advice as well. Especially if you feel like how you felt at the time, that this number was such an extraordinary number. Just practice your reaction to whatever it is that the person may say.
Right.
That's good advice.
Absolutely.
And
literally practicing saying that out loud. Yeah.
And I did but I did present as you were talking the slide that you had posted in the Facebook group. Just asking people to give their feedback. So I had that up as you were chatting.
Yep.
And then I also I just posted or presented it on the slide here, that the conversation between your friend and your friend Colin and yourself.
Yeah.
So now what I'm showing here is basically a couple of images from that photo shoot. So before we go through these images, what we will do after this, guys, is we're going to show you a contract, and we're going to go through a contract, and Justin is going to explain to us. He's going to break it down, how these costs all come together. He's going to also share with you a resource and where you could go to help you if this is something that you want to get into, commercial photography, that is. This is a great resource that could help you to put together these contracts. So like he said, it's not an inflated cost. These are actual costs, and he's going to help you. This website and what Justin is going to explain is going to help you, put those things together. So, Justin, these are the awesome 20K photos that you put together for your client.
I'm glad that I could see here that you just a moment ago showed my some of my other work, and I'm glad that you did, because I think that there's this idea that that these photographs, images that cost $20,000. And again, that was the cost of the production. That was not, I wish that Ernesto, that I walked away with $20,000 in my pocket. I certainly made a fair amount of money, what was fair for the work that I was providing. But, you know, these images are good. They're not the best work I've ever done, though. They're certainly not work that I would put in my portfolio. But here's the important part. There's a difference between the value that they have to me as a photojournalist and as a commercial photographer is trying to promote my brand, and the value that they have to the company. That company is trying to tell a story, right? And they wanted to show and illustrate the people of their company. They wanted to show the diversity of their company. They wanted to show the women of their company. And so that value, it's variable. It's dependent upon the end user, right? And that's why it's helpful to know, are these images going to be used here? Are they going to be used regionally, nationally, globally? They all have different value depending upon where they go. And so, you know, as your viewers are looking at those photographs and they're thinking to themselves, like scratching their head going like, what in the world? I'm with you. Believe me, I had a moment while we were on the photo shoot just before it began. We're in Atlanta. Let me digress here just for a second. We're in Atlanta. We're getting ready to do the photo shoot. My assistant's there. Everything's come together. Everybody's, you know, ready to rock and roll. This has happened a few times now, and I call it my bathroom moment, where, you know, I realize hey, this is where the rubber meets the road. And there's a little panic that sort of overcomes you, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, like all these people are relying on me. And I've got more experience today than I did on that first photo shoot, commercial photo shoot, I should differentiate between, a few years ago. And I walked into the bathroom, and I had a conversation with myself. I looked in the mirror and I said, Justin, this is just like anything you've ever done in your entire 20-year history of photographing. It's not any different. These people hired you to do the same thing that you've always done. They are paying you substantially more money to do it, but don't let that sway or impact how you make pictures, how you do what you do. You've been practicing this for 20 years. Do what you do. That's what they hired you for. These are literally the words that I said to myself in the mirror, splashed some water on my face, walked outside, and I made pictures. And I did what I normally did. But there was this notion in my mind that this is such a bigger job. I have to be bigger and better and more huge than the best thing that I'd ever created. And well, that's not the case. They wanted me to create the same type of images that they had seen from the work that I'd done previously. So anyhow, I think it's important to sort of to illustrate that for these folks, you know, that they're hiring you to do what you're good at doing. And oftentimes the money is not coming out of their pocket necessarily. It's coming out of the business's pocket. And the business oftentimes has a lot more money than the individuals who work there, right? You may have had a question in there, Ernesto, at some point, but as I do, I often digress. And so bring me back to what that question was.
No, I think you addressed it. Because, you know, ultimately this is the output of the job, but it's really about, you know, how to get to it from the start, which is basically engaging with the clientele and providing your estimate to that client. That's just that basic journey. In terms of the execution of the job, you know, everyone that's watching this right now are photographers, probably, right? And most of us know how to turn on a camera. And I'm sure most of them could actually execute the same exact thing that you just did and probably do it every day, you know, take these same types of pictures.
I like to think I've got a little experience to give me a little bit of an edge, but I hear what you're saying.
You know, the concept wise, it could, you know, try to execute some of these images. But, you know, just I'm hoping that they're getting the knowledge out of what you're saying is, you know, how to start something like this with a client, how to basically present yourself properly from your website, starting just from the website, how to properly package a contract and present it properly to a clientele. So that's really what I'm hoping for them to get out of this. So the next slide I'm going to show is the resources that you have provided to me, which is 4 specific resources. And we're going to get into one of these resources in a little bit more detail. So one of those resources, guys, and Justin, you could probably talk to this a little bit more, but one of the resources is wonderfulmachine.com, and the other one is Workbook. The
Mm,
other is at Edge, and then the last
mhm,
one here is productionparadise.com.
Yeah. So each one of these companies that you just mentioned are organizations, they're businesses, right? And they're businesses that are there to serve photographers. When you're doing photo shoots like Nick Vidros did that I mentioned earlier for Citibank, it's an entire production. It's not dissimilar to like a movie production for that matter. There's a lot of moving parts. There's producers that are hired specifically to help facilitate all of these to orchestrate. When you're a photographer on a bigger production, you're literally like a conductor and you're helping to orchestrate, but you have assistants that help with that process. And some of the assistants are there to help with the administrative details. Some of the assistants are there to help you set up lights and tear down lights and move things, right? These companies are companies that assist photographers in some of those processes. The first one that I want to talk about that you listed there is Wonderful Machine. Wonderful Machine was one of the companies that I employed the first time that I was trying to figure out what the cost was going to be. I knew what the costs were going to be because of the sort of line items, if you will, for my expenses. I knew what the cost for my flight, my food, my travel, my assistant. I knew what those costs were going to be, but I didn't know necessarily what the value of the photographs were to a company as big as the company was that I was photographing for, who wanted to use those images nationally. Were those images worth $10,000 each? Were they worth $200 each? It's difficult to say, but here's the reality, Ernesto. Every sort of art buyer, right? This is the person whose job it is to acquire imagery for a company or an ad agency. They're familiar what cost should be relative to the cost of an image. And if you're curious about that, you can go to Getty Images, pick any image on a Getty website and go through the process. There's a little breakdown and it will say, where is this image going to be used? Is it going to be used in a editorial publication? Is it going to be used on a website? Is it going to be used on advertising? And you can get a rough estimate of what the cost is for one picture. And this is one of the ways that I often will help sell my clients on the fact that they're getting custom photography, because I'll say, hey, have you looked at what that image might cost if you bought it from a stock agency like Getty Images? And I'll say no, and I walk them through the process and I say, well, you want to use this picture for brochures, a television commercial, and on the back of buses in Shanghai. That's going to cost that image. Each individual image is worth $13,000 if you're going to do that. And their minds are blown. They're going like, what in the world? So anyhow, I didn't have an understanding of that. Getty Images I went to and I got a rough estimate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out to the folks at Wonderful Machine, and I contracted one of their consultants, and they're not cheap. I think their rate, I don't remember off the top of my head what their rate is, but if you reach out to them, they'll tell you. And I worked with one of their consultants, and he helped me figure out. He helped me put together the contract, and he helped me think about things that I had not considered. What about this, Justin? Did you take into account these things? And once I received their help, I was able to put a finalized contract, and that's the contract that I presented to the client. If you want, they'll literally put the contract together for you. If you want, they'll even send it to the client. They'll be the intermediary between you and the client. I wanted to do this I wanted to be a part of the experience so that I got the knowledge. But this is one of the ways that, and Wonderful Machine is one of many sort of companies that can assist in this process. That I was able to determine what my cost should be for this particular project.
And so if you could talk about the other three really briefly, and then we get into the
Yeah,
agreement. Um, so the other ones being Workbook, Ad Edge, and Production Paradise.
yeah. So workbook. So when you're competing at the level of, again, this is you're at the major leagues when you're trying to vie for. Let me just preface this by saying this: a $20,000 photo shoot for somebody who came from a job where he got paid annually $29,000 for a full year's worth of work. A $20,000 job seems like a tremendous amount of money. In the commercial world, it's a decent amount of money, but I have to be completely candid with you and tell you that it's at the lower end of the spectrum. There are jobs where these people are competing. And if you go to Wonderful Machine and you look at the link that Ernesto provided, you can see contracts for jobs that are 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, $200,000 jobs, right? Because this is business. I am a business doing business with other businesses. I'm no longer just some guy sitting in Raleigh, North Carolina on my couch. I'm a business. And when businesses do business with businesses, that's how you get toilet seats. It costs $80,000 or whatever the costs are, right? If you're not familiar with that story, Google it. But anyways, the Workbook, or workbook.com, is an agency that you pay money to represent your work, because art buyers, ad agency individuals whose job it is to buy art, photographs, are included under that umbrella, they go to websites like workbook.com and they find photographers, because these are the upper echelon of photographers. And so you can pay to have your work listed on Workbook. It's not just the cost. Your work has to be good enough. They're vetted. They're not going to bring anybody in. So one, the cost is exorbitant, in my opinion, but if you get a job through that, it can pay for itself in one job. But the cost to have your work listed with Workbook, as far as I'm aware, currently is $8,000 for a year's worth of time. That's on their website. And they also send out these beautiful books, right? You're paying a lot of money for this. These beautiful books that they send to the individuals whose job it is to buy photography or art buyers, at these different ad agencies. And so for $8,000, your work is listed on their website. And they promote you. You're sort of paying them to promote you to the upper echelon of brands. These are art buyers from Nike to, McDonald's to, every major brand you've heard of has somebody whose job it is, has oftentimes many people whose job it is. And so this is the intermediary. This is sort of how you have to be good enough, right? They vet your work. They determine whether it's good enough. And then you pay $8,000 and you're listed in their catalog, which comes out once a year for Workbook, and on their website. AdEdge is another company. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the person who started AdEdge was once working at Workbook. And go and visit these websites. And when you look at their work, you'll see why these people are paid what they're paid to do what they do, because their work is exceptional. These are the New York Yankees of photographers in the commercial world who compete at this sort of level. Workbook, AdEdge, both of these are fantastic companies. Subscribe to their newsletters, see what they're doing, see how they're telling stories. And then finally, Production Paradise is a smaller agency that works similarly. They're based in Europe, and their influence is a little more global than either of these two companies that I previously mentioned, which are domestic, US based. But they're both companies that essentially vet your work and determine whether you are of the caliber to compete with, or they want to risk themselves representing you to their clients at the end of the day. Hopefully that makes clear sense.
It makes plenty of sense. When you initially had shared these resources to me, I think I mentioned to you that I don't believe, me personally, others might be viewing this video, maybe they have heard of these resources before, but I personally have never heard of these resources before. And I particularly love the wonderful machine, the fact that I could go there and actually see some real contracts that people put together to get an idea of, okay, am I going in the right direction or not? Just give me some overall good information. So these are great resources. A lot of photographers who are
absolutely
out there, doing educational photography and whatnot. I don't hear them talking about these resources at all. So, but I find them very valuable.
Yeah, and again, it's important to emphasize this is not the second step in your career journey. This is, the sort of the final destination. This is the big league, if you will. Yeah. And my work is not represented on their website. I've presented my work to them, and they've said that they would welcome it. But I have not decided that it is worthy of the cost to do so. I recognize and I appreciate that getting a job from a client who go to these resources to look for photographers like myself could pay for the cost of this 3 times, 4 times over in one assignment or one job. Assignments are more of a term for the editorial world. But there's lots of photographers as well. It's not just being represented there. Go there, and if you look through their photographers, there's some stuff there that you find is not. There's stuff that is out of the park, and there's other stuff that is you're going like, how did this person get on here? Because it's not of the same caliber. Mm-hmm. There's an echelon, right? There absolutely is, and it's narrow, but there are varying degrees of caliber on those websites. And so I say that to say this: you can pay $8,000 if they accept you, And you may not get a call from any one of the major brands that are out there. It's not just this. It's creating relationships. It's doing marketing campaigns. This is one component of a much larger puzzle. But again, at the level that these individuals that we're talking about are competing at, this is an important component of that.
Agreed. So before we get into the contract, guys, if you do have any questions for the ones that are here live, you could drop those questions in the comments. I'm just going to basically plug one thing really quickly here. Not that they asked me to plug this. I just find it to be something that is good for the photography community. So I figured that I might just share it. So here I will just share my desktop really quickly. So this was a change.org, something that I became aware of on my Instagram feed from Dr. Tamaya. If you don't know Dr. Tamaya, she is a wonderful person that has an educational platform, and she also do this photo conference, which is called the Photography Cookout. So if you guys haven't gone to that before, you should check it out. She also, for this year, because of the whole, whole virus situation, she did a virtual photography cookout. So you could go check that out. That being said, she is have this change.org cause going that basically is for the photography industry to support the fair and ethical I can't even say the word, treatment of photographers of color. Okay. So I contributed to this, and I just thought it would be a great thing to share with you all. Like I said, she didn't reach out to me to do this, but I figure I might as well share it to you if you guys are not aware of it. So you don't have to pay anything. It's just basically to sign up. And if you're in the photography industry, it's probably something that you probably would be interested with. Now, when you do sign up, it does ask you at the end if you wanted to suggest, if you want to contribute anything. You don't have to if you don't want to. It's just a matter of you signing up to support the cause. All right, so I just wanted to plug that really quick. Now, let's get into the contract. So, Justin, I believe I shared with you the link now. To clarify, this is not a and let me just switch here to both of our views. So Justin, I believe this is not this is not Justin's actual contract. This is a contract from Wonderful Machine. So this is an example of one of those contracts that you would get from Wonderful Machine. But I wanted to use this contract as an example so that Justin could walk through for us from top to bottom and just help us understand what each one of these line items mean and how you could go about coming up with the cost. So if this is something that you're trying to present to a potential client, you'll have an idea of how to walk through something like this and how to present it. So this is a $40,000 real contract that was submitted. I don't know if it was approved, but it was submitted. So we're going to walk through it here really quick. So Justin, if you have it up, I have it up on my screen.
Yeah, I have it here. Yeah. So I just want to share with folks, just to offer some insight. Again, Wonderful Machine, they don't pay me. In fact, I've paid them a lot of money over the years. I feel like they owe me one at this point, since I mentioned them 12 times in this conversation. They help you come up with these contracts. And the nice thing about this, as Ernesto has somewhat mentioned, but I want to make sure that it's clear, the website that he listed before has all of these contracts available. The reason that they're redacted and you can't see who the clients are is because they want to level the playing field and let photographers know that this is what other people are charging. If you know that you're competing with somebody who's making 7 times as much money as you are for the type of work you're doing, hopefully you're going to increase your prices, right? There's a phrase, and I'll talk about this in a moment, but rising tides raise all ships, right? If I know that what you're charging is 7 times more and I raise my prices, and then the guy who competes with me raises his prices, we can all sort of raise our rates and still compete at a fair level. And I think that's really important. It's very unfortunate, and this happens extremely commonly, one out of, I think, just naivety, but also out of maybe just ignorance, like willful ignorance, A lot of people don't realize that the work that they're doing is worth a lot more than they're getting compensated for it. And so at the end of the day, they're charging a fraction of what they should probably charge for the work that they're doing. That not only makes it hard for them because they're not going to be sustainable. You cannot sustain a business charging less than what your cost of doing business is, right? You got to know what your cost of doing businesses is in PPA, cost of doing business calculator. That's how you figure that out. And then you can know what to charge appropriately. Wonderful Machine has these contracts there because they want people to be able to go look at them and say, my gosh, like I did a photo shoot just like this and I got paid $600. There's people making $20,000 to do those kind of photo shoots. So you can go there and you can browse these contracts that are available to anybody. They're not behind a paywall. They're not a secret. You can go there and you can see all of them, all on their blog, and a number of other things that are available, resources for photographers that are beneficial as well. So this is let's jump into this contract as I'm speaking here. I'm just going to scroll down. So I have not had a chance to look at this, but previously, but this is a contract. Let's see here. It's a simple contract, right? Job description will create this individual will create a variety of cityscape images and B-roll video content depicting blank. That's probably the client, as well as a variety of individual portraits of up to 10 community members over 3 shoot days, 2 days of portraits with 5 portraits per day, and 1 cityscape day in probably the city, and convey the following licensing, right? So we're already in the job description, we have exactly what the client is going to get. What are the deliverables? If these things are not made clear, the client might have an expectation and you might have an expectation. And if those two expectations do not match, you're going to create tension, and that's going to create a problem for you later down the road. So following licensing, we talked about before, is this image going to be used on the back of buses in Shanghai, or is this just going to be in my neighborhood? That has value. And the licensing of that image, if you're somebody who is taking your photographs for a commercial purpose and you're handing them over to a client and they can use them however they choose to, at the end of the day, you're potentially losing out on a tremendous sum of money, because if that client hires you to photograph that picture and they use that picture because they say they want to put it on some notepad or they want to put it on some flyer, and then 3 months later, it's a 2-page ad in a magazine, well, that's going to be a problem. That has a lot more value. This magazine that goes out nationwide, well, this one's just a North Carolina magazine, but you get the idea. A magazine that goes out nationwide, it has a lot more value. So it's important to differentiate and define how those images are going to be used. So what are these images going to be used for right here? Unlimited use, right, of up to 20 images, 10 cityscapes, and 10 portraits, and all video content captured in perpetuity. So they're going to be allowed to use these pictures for whatever they want. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. There's nothing wrong with being able to give your clients the ability to use these pictures for whatever they want for as long as they want. That's what perpetuity means. What's important, Ernesto, is at the end of the day, and everyone else listening, is that you're compensated fairly for that use. If this is a big company and they want to use that picture on billboards or on the back of buses in Shanghai, they can do that, right? And so that's going to cost more money. So let's scroll down. So let's break it down. We're going to, here's the client provisions as well, which is important to note. These are the things that the clients are responsible for. You'll find these in every single contract. Client is to provide talent. So that means that they're not going to hire people. They're going to use whomever they have, at these locations. Any necessary hair, makeup, wardrobe, prop styling, production coordination, that's the producer's job, and acquire any necessary releases. In order to do commercial work, so that those images can be used in advertising or to promote a brand or product, you have to have the subject sign a document that says that you can use their picture for that use. If you don't, you find yourself in hot water real fast. So those are the things that the client is responsible for at the end of the day. The next thing we're going to go down here, we're going to look at fees. The fees, the creative fee and the licensing fee and the photographer pre-production day. So let's start from the bottom of that. The pre-production day is the cost for that photographer to do the work to help prepare for this photo shoot, whether that might be traveling to the destination. Usually there's a travel day it's differentiated and it says there's a travel day. This is like, it's going to take a photographer up to 8 hours, potentially 1 day of time to arrange everything in their world to make this photo shoot happen before the actual photo shoot happens. So the cost for that is $750. There's 1 day of that. The next fee we see above that is the licensing fee. The licensing fee for this photo shoot is $13,000, right? So whoever was determining whatever the usage is, it was determined that the value of these pictures, just to use these pictures, just to have them in possession and to use them, not to shoot them, to use them, is $13,000. That's a tremendous sum of money, right? That's a lot of money. This entire project is an $18,000 project. $13,000 of that is in licensing. This is why it's imperative that you license your work instead of just saying to somebody you can use it for whatever you want as long as you want if you're working in the commercial world. Obviously, if you're shooting weddings or you're shooting senior portraits, there's not a senior on the planet who's going to use this picture to potentially promote his billion-dollar brand or whatever. Hopefully that makes sense. The next fee is the creative fee. The creative fee is the cost for the photographer to produce the photographs. That is what he or she is charging in order to create these images. And that is $2,800 per day. So there's 3 days of shooting. So three creative fee days, right? The total cost for that is $8,400, $13,000 to use the pictures, $750 in order to prepare the shoot. So those are the fees associated with this particular shoot. It comes out to $22,150. That excludes any of the expenses. So now let's move down to the expenses.
Well,
every single one of these has to be accounted for. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you jump onto the expenses, because I think the expenses is obviously
pretty straightforward.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. But in terms of the fees, which is that section up there, how can photographers come up with what their fee is supposed to be? Because I guess your fee, your creative fee versus my creative fees versus another creative fees might vary, right? So how does one, determine, okay, that I need to charge $2,800, each day?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ernesto. I mentioned a couple of times, how does one determine whether they're sustainable? How do you determine whether you can be sustainable as a business or not? Any business, it doesn't matter if you're a photographer or not. What do you have to determine? Your cost of doing business, right? You have to determine what your cost of doing business is. How much does it cost me to turn on the lights, to pay for my fancy iPhone, to pay for my Godex transceiver, to pay for my, all of these things? How much does it cost me? So at the end of the day, I have to figure out what the cost for me is to stay in business. I figure out that cost, right? Let's say the cost for me to be in business, to put a roof over my head, to eat the food that I enjoy eating is, let's say it's $70,000 a year, right? So then I take that number and I say, how many days am I going to work this year? I'm probably, as a commercial photographer, maybe I'm going to work, I don't know, maybe I'm going to work 60, 80, 90, 120 days out of the year. You got to subtract all the weekends, you got to subtract all the holidays. And how many photo shoots do you think you can get? So you take that number, right? Let's say it's $70,000 is my cost of doing business, because that's how much I know it costs me to maintain the lifestyle that I want to live in. I divide that number by the number of days that I can shoot, and suddenly I have a figure that tells me what the total cost is. That I can't leave my house. I cannot leave my house to do a photo shoot unless somebody's paying me this much money. I can do that, but I'm going to lose money. I'm going to lose money doing that, right? So you have to know what your cost of doing business is. For this particular photographer, let's just do the math. For this particular photographer, they determined that the cost for them, let's take 22,800. Let's say that they're going to do, 36 photo shoots in a year, right? That's $100,000 costs of doing business. They've decided that they can't leave their house for less than $2,800 a year. So maybe their cost of doing businesses are right around this number. If you do the math, it's not a hard thing to figure out. So maybe somebody who lives in a different part of the world where the cost of their rent is a fraction of what the cost of rent is in the United States. Or let's just take somebody who lives in New York City, right? The guy who lives in New York City is going to have to charge substantially more than the person who lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, because of the fact that my cost of living, my cost of doing business is substantially less. So that's how you figure out what that creative fee is going to be. And I've seen that thing vary. Go through these estimates. They're all on this website. And if you ever have any questions, if you ever reach out to Wonderful Machine, tell them, just in case Conder sent you, because hopefully they'll remember that when I call them and I need some help in the future. But you can go through these and you can see what the different costs are for the creative fees. It's not uncommon either for photographers to combine the creative fee and the licensing fee together, because here's one of the drawbacks of this approach that we're looking at here. If you take your creative fee and you separate it from the licensing fee, then they can nickel and dime you. The client at the end of the day can come to you and they can say, well, we eliminated one day's photo shoot. So now you cannot charge us that. We're going to subtract $2,800 from the total cost of the entire photo shoot, right? Well, that makes sense. Like there's 1 day of less shooting, one day of less creative fee. So it's easier for them to manipulate those numbers, and you know, it's not necessarily the people on the creative side. It's the penny pinchers. It's the accountants of these companies. It's the CFOs that sign off on these photo shoots that are going to do that. They're going to say, let's make it a 2-day photo shoot, pack all the same stuff in 2 days. We can save $2,800. Plus, that's one less day of equipment, one less day of assistance, right? So sometimes you combine the creative fee and the licensing fee together, so it's more challenging for the penny pinchers to break those things down and try and sort of cut the edges off of what your costs are.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. I was like looking at this. I was wondering why the creative fee and the license fee is different. You know, why is on two different separate lines? And I think you just answered that.
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. It's just a very. Sometimes there are clients that will specifically ask for that. They want to know what you're getting paid per day, right? Mm-hmm. And they want to know, because here's the other factor too. Maybe they come to you and they say, hey, you know, we want, what was it, 20 images, 10 cityscapes, and 10 portraits. And they come back and they say, hey, you know what, like our third quarter numbers came in. We're going to have to slash the advertising, the ad buy. This is called an ad buy. It's helpful to learn all these terms. And if you pay attention to these blogs, you learn what these things mean, because when you can speak the lingo and you're familiar with the terms, you sound like you know what you're talking about, right? And that's an important variable in your perception of value. So if they come back to me and they say, hey, the ad buy, the cost we're going to pay to purchase advertising for this is, we've just shaved it by $10,000, you know, let's say $100,000. Well, then that means that they don't have to pay as much for the licensing, because the usage is different. It's changed now, right? So maybe that's why they want to know why the licensing fee is separate from the creative fee. That's just one potential explanation for why that happens.
Okay. And like I said, the expenses on here like is pretty obvious, but I guess, you know, I guess the message on this particular contract is sometimes I guess some folks would not necessarily think of things as expenses. So I guess if you're looking at this particular contract, like, I don't know if you could call out some things that typically people won't think about to list as a potential expense.
Let's just, you know, like let's go down the list, and you know, if it's apparent what it is, we'll skip it. An assistant, that's pretty apparent of what that's going to be. A first assistant is somebody who is a little more skilled than a second assistant. Maybe a second assistant is somebody they're a little bit younger, they're a little less experienced. A digital tech, what's their job? Their job is to bring their computer, bring their system. Oftentimes on these big photo shoots, the clients are there. They want to see the images you're photographing. You're shooting tethered. I've got a behind the scenes video that's coming up that'll be out in the next several weeks. I encourage you to visit my website and check it out. There will be an entire section, and you can see I have a digital tech. My camera's tethered. I'm shooting. I've got all the clients from Lenovo who are standing behind me, looking over my shoulder every photo that I take, right? There's a lot of pressure in these things they're looking at. That digital tech's job is to get that imagery from the camera into their computer. Sometimes they're mocking up, sometimes they're doing a color grade, but they're there to just facilitate the process, make sure that the images that are coming from the camera are captured on a drive and that they're saved and safe and secure, right? It's one less thing the photographer. It's the stuff you do already, but you're paying somebody to do this. And here's the other factor too, that I'll just again be candid with you. There's a little bit of a cushion on every number that you're seeing here for the first assistant at $400. Well, that person, the photographer, is likely paying that assistant. Maybe they're paying that assistant $300. Maybe they're paying that assistant $350. There's a little bit of padding, about maybe like a 20% markup to get that photographer there, right? So that's another variable. There's ways and means, just like when you go to the grocery store. Grocery store is not a good example. Just like when you go to I don't know, someplace that has a high markup. Who charges high markups on things? Whatever they charge, it's like 60% or 80%. Photographers have to include markups as well.
Louis Vuitton.
What's that?
Louis Vuitton.
The movies?
No, Louis.
Yeah, Louis Vuitton, right? Mm-hmm. Perception of value, right? Yeah. They carry the stuff inside of Louis Vuitton the same way it does in my JanSport backpack.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's move along here. Digital tech, that's their job. A producer's job is to facilitate the process. They're there to make sure that the food gets there on time. They're there to make sure that the talent is there. They're prepared. They're there to, when they get there and there's a car blocking the driveway, it's their job to figure out how to get that car out of the way. Permits in a lot of these locations, if you're doing a commercial photo shoot, everybody wants their pay, right? Everybody wants their cut. So the city of Raleigh, the city of New York, the city of Los Angeles, the building that you're going to be photographing in maybe says, hey, yeah, you can shoot here. We have an amazing building. We recognize that this building has value. And if you want access to it, you're going to have to pay me. Give me some dollars. Equipment. This might be one that surprises people. The equipment that I'm using, I own a lot of that equipment. But guess what? It costs me money to buy that equipment. A lot of photographers out there are stumped. They're like, wait a minute, you charge money in order to, you rent your equipment to the companies? Absolutely, I rent my equipment to my companies. I know it's a mind-blowing idea, but when you're at these levels, you want the best equipment that you can get. And oftentimes you're renting equipment so that you can have the best that there is out there. You know, if you're shooting with a medium format back, it costs $30,000, and every 2 years they come out with a new one, you're not going to pay for that. So you're going to rent it, right? So sometimes people, there's a budget for that in the process. These companies are accustomed to paying for these things. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they'll be like, you know, why don't you just use your own camera? And I'm like, you know, every sort of line item, I have some variables that I'm willing to move on, that I'm willing to budge on a little bit so that I can make it a little more desirable, right? It's a part of the negotiation. So that might be something that I add in there so that I'm willing later to reduce the cost on so that I don't lose the client, right? You got to build these things in there though. And if you don't build these things in there in the first place, you're not going to have anything to take away at the end of the day when it comes to negotiating. You're going to hose yourself. So video equipment, parking, meals, and miscellaneous, right? It costs, you're traveling to some other place. The government has a website that you can go to. I don't know what it is, but just look up, like, they have an entire calculator that can tell you you're traveling to this city. This is what a typical meal costs in this city. This is what a typical dinner costs. This is what the government affords their people who are traveling on their behalf to go to this city. This is what a hotel costs. You can punch in the city, you can punch in the zip code, and it will tell you an average lunch in this place costs much money. So I'm going to go to Los Angeles. Again, the cost of lunch in Los Angeles is going to be different than the cost of lunch in Idaho, right? It's just going to be different. But those are things, if I'm traveling on the road, like, these people should be paying for this. I'm not able to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in my house with bread that I bought down the street for, like, you know, $2 for a loaf of bread at Costco. So there's costs. You have to factor in these costs. One, and they expect those costs to be factored in, because guess what? If you're working for them, they're not going to send you on a trip to, you know, as a client, if you're doing sales and not pay for your lunch. If you're working for a company that does that, you might want to look for another company. Processes, right, for client review. It takes time. After I get back from the photo shoot, it takes time to process the photos. I spend half a day to go through the pictures, select the ones I want, to tone those pictures, to process those pictures, to rename them. All of this time, if I'm dedicating it to a particular client, is time that I should be compensated for. If I'm not being compensated for it, I'm doing a disservice to myself, number one. And well, what's the reason you should be compensated for it, Justin? Because I'm dedicating that time to this client, right? I could be using that time otherwise to spend time with my family, or you know, hang out at the park, or, you know, watch my favorite TV show. If that client if that time is dedicated to that client, then they should be paying for that time, right? They wouldn't pay. There's not a CEO on this planet who isn't getting paid for his or her time that they're working. You know, think about billable hours with a lawyer or your doctor or your dentist. All of these things, when you're working as a business, stop thinking of yourself as an individual. I'm a photographer. I am a business. My job is a business. My business is taking pictures, but overarchingly, I am a business. Video editing to be determined, right? So the cost wasn't there. So anyhow, these are the costs relatively, now that I've helped you understand, you know, what people are charging. And as you go through these contracts, you'll see these vary to some degree. But art buyers at ad agencies know that if you throw in there and you say that your first assistant is $900 a day, they're going to balk. They're going to say, there's not a first assistant on the planet who makes $900 a day, you know, and you're also competing. Oftentimes these people are looking at your contract, and they're looking at, you know, Steve's contract, and they're looking at Colin's contract, and they're looking at Joe's contract out in Fresno, California. And they're thinking like, hey man, like, Foster Farms wants us to photograph for them. Who can do this for the best price? And here's the other thing. I'm getting long-winded. I'm getting on my soapbox, but you don't want a guy on the block. You don't want to be the cheapest person. I've been in negotiations, and I've had the ear of the ad agency or the client at the end of the day. And if you are the cheapest, least expensive person, they're going to factor that in, and they're going to say, why is everybody else coming in at this price, and this person is down here at this price? Maybe he or she is not as good. So if you're trying to be the cheapest person, like maybe your client's Walmart, right? That they compete on price. But I don't want to be I don't want to be the photographer that competes on price. I want to be the photographer that competes on the best work that I can bring to the table that allows me to live the lifestyle that I want to live. So that's important to note as well.
And plus, it also gives you an opportunity, if needed, to negotiate, right? If you
Absolutely.
if you give like a $50,000 contract, but it's overinflated by maybe 20 or 30%, that would give you enough room to negotiate
Yeah.
with that potential client
Some
too.
wiggle.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, Ernesto, there are jobs that I do, I don't want to I don't want to leave this conversation with the notion that I only do 20, 30, $40,000 jobs. That's not, I do jobs all the time. In fact, I have a checklist for when a client calls me, because again, it's not just about the cost. I ask myself, is this going to pay me? Maybe it's not going to pay me, but maybe this is work that I'm interested in doing, and the work you show is the work you get. So maybe I'm willing to take a lower fee to do this particular project. Maybe at the end of the day, it's going to cost me money, right? I don't leave my house for less than X amount of dollars. Maybe it's going to cost me money, but the value that I'm going to get from being able to tell the story about that photo shoot or to produce the images to use for my portfolio might have value too. Maybe it's a person I want to work with. I want to build a rapport with them. Maybe it's a brand that I want to be able to say that I've done photo shoots for this brand because that gives me credibility. All of these things are important. So, there's checklists. PDN used to have a list of like, variables that you can ask. What are the factors that I'm interested in using to determine whether this is a client that I want to work with? It's not always just about the cost. It's not always just about the money.
One thing I mentioned that's not on here, and I'm sure there's much more things that's not on here for the expenses, is some photographers outsource your post production. So that's one of the other
Absolutely.
things that you could have on as a potential expense that's on this list.
Sure.
Um,
Yep.
so let me just go
Or
back.
better yet, if you're the person doing the retouching, if you're the person doing the post production, again, that's time that you're dedicating to this client that could be used otherwise spent marketing yourself, shooting for yourself, hanging out with your kids, hanging out with your girlfriend, or whatever it is that you like to do. So if you're spending time, then that should be included in some variable, as some variable for the job.
I totally agree. Time is money. So I didn't see any questions popping in from anyone. But let's see here. I give them an opportunity. But Justin, look, it was an incredible conversation. I really enjoy you sharing your story, sharing your journey over your 22 years of in this business, and how you transition from photojournalism into commercial photography, and that wonderful story about was that your first job, the first job in commercial photography, or no?
That was my first sort of like, I mean, again, I had done smaller PR jobs,
Mm-hmm.
much smaller. This was my first, I would say, like commercially produced photo shoot. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that journey. I think your story is going to help a lot of people who's trying to get into this world of commercial photography. So I think with that being said, is there anything else that you want to leave the people with before we end this broadcast?
Yeah. I would, and I appreciate you taking a moment to ask. The first thing I would say is that follow me on Instagram, JCase Photo, at JCase Photo, JK8. Well, you can see it on screen there. I really enjoy sharing the knowledge that I have. I sometimes am inundated with questions from folks, and that can be a little overwhelming to get back to people. But I like to post my stories on photo shoots, what I'm doing, and I enjoy engaging. The reason at the end of the day, Ernesto, that I know this stuff, that I'm able to share this information with you and your viewers, is because somebody helped me at some point along my journey. Tomaso Valle in Fresno, California, who was my mentor, Craig Colrus, Gary Kazanjian, John Harrington in DC, Colin Linton up in Philly. All of these people have provided knowledge to me so that I could allow myself to do this work, just like you're doing for these people, right? I mean, you shared that your motivation was to learn these things yourself. When we talked about doing this interview, there's a lot of value that comes from that. And so I would say, pay it forward. When at one point in time, I didn't know any of these things, and I learned because I inquired. I was diligent. That's important. But I was curious. And so I sought out that information, and I wanted to do it well. So give me a follow. I talk a lot of, I share the stories behind the scenes of the photo shoots that I do, and just, what it's like to be a human in this sort of day and age, and the experiences we have. All of those things. I'm pretty candid and open on my Instagram stories and the like. So give me a follow, enjoy those. And then finally, I want to take a moment too and recognize that one of the most important organizations that helped me facilitate this process and taught me, amongst the ones that I've shared with you today, is the American Society of Media Photographers. ASMP is the organization. They have chapters throughout the entire United States. They have tremendous resources. The cost to join the organization is nominal. It pays for itself in, they have a photographer listing where you can go and find photographers in different cities. Don't sign up for the one in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm just teasing. I share this because, again, it comes back to the idea that rising tides raise all ships, right? And if the more we're able to share this knowledge, the less that I'm competing with people who are making this industry more challenging to be sustainable. You have to charge enough to keep a roof over your head. And that comes back to sustainability, knowing what your cost of doing business is. And that's a hard thing to figure out sometimes, but these organizations help you figure those things out. So ASMP is a wonderful organization. They've been monumental in my experience in figuring out how to do this business. Talk to other people and again, pay it forward when that opportunity presents itself.
And this organization, if memory serve, is a global organization, right? That anyone
Correct.
could.
Yeah, work anywhere. They're based here in the United States. They have chapters. I am the local chapter president for the state of North Carolina. We have a board here that does outreach. But I do that because of the fact that I wanted to make other people aware of sort of what other photographers are charging, what they were doing. Just like this, I've had this conversation on a few different platforms, specifically with, excuse me, the purpose of sharing that knowledge. The more that people know, knowledge is power, and whether that's having knowledge of what your experience is like in life relative to other people's experiences, as much as it is photography and the business of photography.
Great. And guys, again, this is Justin's page. He's going to be updating that soon, right? Soon it's going to be updated.
Yeah. Right now it's jkase.com, but within the next few weeks it'll be justinkaseconder.com. I'll have a link on the previous one so that you'll be able to get there as well. But take a moment, follow me on Instagram, and appreciate your time. Thank you for letting me be a part of this conversation. I appreciate it tremendously.
Well, thank you, Justin, for joining the broadcast. I sincerely appreciate it. Sincerely appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience with me and with everyone else that's viewing this. So, with that said, guys, thank you very much for joining this broadcast. I sincerely appreciate you guys watching the video. I hope you guys got a tremendous amount of knowledge from it. Again, I thank Justin for joining us so you could share that experience with us. If you find this video helpful, please go ahead and give it a big thumbs up. Please go ahead and put some comments down below when this video is no longer live. Share this video with your friends and family if you think it will be helpful to them. And guys, I will see you on the next next video. I was going to say live broadcast, but I would basically say I will see you on the next video. And guys, please be safe out there. Take care. I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye. Now let me get this broadcast out. Okay.